Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox. The story centers on Tim Travers, Samuel Dunning, a brilliant but jaded scientific genius whose misanthropy and self-loathing drive him to attempt the ultimate experiment, to solve the time traveler's paradox by going back in time and killing his younger self. The paradox: if he kills himself before he invents the time machine, he never could have traveled back to kill himself, is the very knot Tim intends to untangle. From the onset, he is portrayed as someone desperate to prove a point, not just to the universe, but to himself, that he can break causality, that he can redefine his own existence. He builds a time machine, calibrates exact coordinates and moments, and with manic precision, steps into the past. But the momentous act of attempting self-annihilation sets off a cascade of consequences. Multiple timelines begin to split, versions of Tim diverge, memories bleed across iterations. Into his life steps Delilah, Felicia Day, a volatile and charming figure. Their relationship is colored by instability, attraction, tension, and the way she acts as both ally and mirror to his darker impulses. Then there is Royce, Danny Trejo, an international crime lord with a mysterious vendetta tied to Tim's experiments. His resources and muscle make him a formidable antagonist who does not adhere to conventional rules. James Bunratty, Joel McHale, is a conspiracy theorist and radio host who becomes an unlikely wild card, broadcasting truth, lies, and half-baked theories about Tim's actions to the world. And looming in the background is the simulator, Keith David, a godlike or meta-entity who oversees causal integrity, enforcing, or attempting to enforce, rules that maintain the fabric of reality. Early scenes bounce between Tim's lab, sudden jumps in time, attempts to kill younger Tim, and repercussions he doesn't foresee, instability in reality, bizarre visions, conflicting memories. The narrative begins with scientific hubris, but rapidly unfolds into existential crisis. Tim isn't just battling paradoxes or opponents, but versions of himself, and the question of whether identity is stable in a broken timeline. The film's tone mixes absurd comedic beats with high-concept science fiction, making the audience ask, if your past self dies, who remains? Once Tim initiates his time journey, the film escalates rapidly into tangled complexity. He returns to moments in his past, key turning points, the night he first built the prototype, pivotal heartbreaks, early failures that shaped his ego, and in each encounter, younger Tim reacts with shock, rebellion, or defense, creating temporal ripples. Some versions of Tim try to intervene, others attempt to protect the younger self. Scenes overlap, collapse, or reboot. Delilah becomes his anchor. She confronts him when memories shift, when she experiences déjà vu, when she realizes she may be interacting with multiple Tims across timelines. She questions whether she's being manipulated, whether the real Tim exists, whether their connection is genuine or a temporal construct. Royce surfaces in multiple timelines, sometimes as a hired muscle, sometimes as a puppet master who knew of Tim's experiments in the past and seeks to control them. Royce threatens to eliminate all versions of Tim if he cannot harness the paradox for power. James Bunratty, the radio host, picks up fragments of Tim's broadcasts, conspiracy clues, time anomalies, and builds a cult following, drawing unwanted public attention. The simulator, sometimes visible, sometimes intangible, appears in montage sequences or surreal interludes, warning Tim that some rules of existence can't be broken without cosmic cost. As timelines fracture, Tim begins to see paradoxical anomalies. Objects from one timeline appear in another. Delilah remembers things that younger Delilah did not. Royce appears in rooms before he should. The lab shifts shape, walls flicker. Tim's sense of self unravels. Which version is real? He loses trust in his own memories, becomes haunted by the knowledge that whichever version dies, some other version persists. The film uses this to probe deep questions. Does identity persist across splits? Is the self divisible? Should one kill one's past to escape pain? Scenes crescendo with Tim confronting a younger self in the lab, stabbing, recoil, paradox sparks, the timelines shudder, and the lab shakes, a visual metaphor for everything he's undone in pursuit of controlling time. As the middle of the story unfolds, Tim faces layers of betrayal and revelation. Delilah, in one timeline, reveals she was once a test subject or part of his early experiments but lost memory. she may be older than she seems. In some iterations, she opposes him, tries to stop him, or even tries to assassinate him, believing the paradox to be too dangerous. Royce's threat escalates. He sends assassins across time, forcing Tim to defend younger selves in protective loops. James Bunratty becomes more than commentator. He broadcasts real-time anomalies, exposing Tim's project to the world, forcing Tim to deal with media, public shock, and even lawsuits or threats of temporal contamination. The simulator shows glimpses of the price of paradox, timelines collapsing, universes unstable, existence unraveling. Tim, battered, must reconcile with multiple past Tims, choose which memories to preserve, accept paradox, or risk cosmic collapse. In a powerful sequence, Tim steps into a version of his childhood room, surrounded by toys and early journal entries. Younger Tim is confused, older Tim emotionally frantic. This meeting becomes symbolic of past pain, regret, and the urge to overwrite mistakes. The filmmakers use these scenes to meld sci-fi spectacle with emotional core, Tim's regrets over love, ambition, loneliness, and the steady accumulation of self-betrayal. Delilah interrupts, screaming, trying to stop him from stabbing that younger Tim. His hesitation fractures reality, and the screen warps, non-linear editing, time duplicating, sound echoing. In the chaos, Tim realizes that killing one version won't guarantee control, but instead gives birth to more instability. He must learn to coexist with his past versions, integrate regret, and avoid erasure. Royce attacks physically. One version of Tim fights Royce in a corridor, while another version in the lab fights a different Royce. The film layers parallel confrontations, mirrored frames, echoing dialogue, and collapsing environments. In this war across versions, Tim must find his moral center, to accept himself, flawed, multiple, not erase himself. The paradox becomes not something to solve by killing the past, but to accommodate through acceptance. The emotional stakes intensify when Delilah's safety is threatened in multiple timelines, forcing Tim to protect her from versions of Royce, from paradox fallout, from self-destructive impulses. The climax of Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's paradox brings resolution not through dominance of one timeline, but through synthesis and self-acceptance. In a masterfully shot sequence, multiple Tims converge in the original lab, past, present, future versions overlapping. Royce's final assault threatens to trigger a temporal collapse. The simulator intervenes, or appears, to enforce reality boundaries. Timelines must collapse or integrate. Delilah, standing at the center, pleads with Tim to stop chasing erasure. In the critical moment, Tim faces younger selves, and instead of stabbing them, he reaches a paradoxical compromise. He merges memories, releases control, allows the timeline splits to coalesce. The multiple Tims step back, paradoxic tension throbs, the lab trembles. Royce, refusing to accept integration, is pulled into the collapsing timeline and disappears. The world flickers, objects resolve, anomalies vanish, reality snaps back. Tim emerges as one composite self, scarred by memory but whole. Delilah, by his side, recognizes him, forgiving his flaws, perceiving that he is the sum of all versions. The simulator, perhaps satisfied, retreats, leaving the merged reality intact. In the denouement, Tim records a radio message, echoing Bunratty's earlier broadcasts, warning about paradoxes, accepting himself, urging others not to attempt what he did. James Bunratty hears something in the background, legacy threads drop, there is ambiguity, did the broadcast ripple timelines? The film ends with Tim and Delilah walking through a city street, encountering faint echoes, a passerby who disappears momentarily, an object that flickers, but all mostly stable. Tim glances at a wristwatch that ticks normally now, a sign the paradox is contained. But the viewer senses the fragility of existence, that time is still malleable, and that identity remains a mystery. In the final thematic stroke, Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox is not just a sci-fi comedy about paradoxes and time travel, it's a meditation on identity, regret, self-acceptance, and the hubris of trying to erase our past. Tim begins as someone desperate to eliminate himself, believing his mistakes deserve deletion, but ends by learning that even flawed versions of oneself have value and must be integrated, not destroyed. Delilah's role is crucial. She becomes the emotional anchor, the voice of reason, the humanizing force who sees Tim beyond versions. Royce remains the embodiment of forceful ambition, resisting acceptance, and the film uses him to show the cost of control. James Bunratty, representing public perception and conspiracy, shows how truth splits across timelines and stories. The simulator is metaphorical and literal, reality's referee, reminding us that existence has rules, even in fantasy, and that balance is hard-won. The film's tone, funny, weird, chaotic, never lets the weight of existential risks slip. Laughter undercuts dread, but dread always hangs over every jump. The visual style uses mirrored frames, echoes, overlapping dialogue, rapidly shifting color temperature when timelines sever, and dissolving edits to suggest instability. By the end, the paradox is not solved in a classic way, but managed. Tim's serenity is partial, his identity plural, his life uncertain, yet he steps forward into that uncertainty. The final image lingers on a ripple in time, a slight stutter in reality, and Delilah's hand in his, as if to say, we live with paradoxes always, and the choice is not to destroy ourselves but to live with them. For viewers, the message resonates. We cannot kill our past, only reconcile with it. We cannot erase versions of ourselves without erasing parts of our soul. The film invites reflection. If you met your past self, would you destroy them, or embrace them? And if you want to watch this kind of short movie explanation, don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel to get latest video. Bye bye, take care.